Great. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Hope you're well and enjoying your August here in Minnesota. And welcome to our conversation on the July jobs report. We're excited to walk through these numbers with you today. Before we begin, wanted to highlight the fact that by the next time we're meeting to discuss job numbers, we will have seen the federal unemployment insurance benefits expire. Those come to an end on September 4th. Just wanted to highlight for all the reporters here that that is coming, and the more you can do to raise awareness amongst your readers on that fact, we'd be appreciative. We know that we have about 200,000 people right now pulling down weekly benefits, and many of those benefits will expire the week beginning September 4th. We're doing a lot to reach out to those who are on benefits to make sure they're aware that they're coming to an end, and holding webinars and info sessions on finding a job in Minnesota's economy, as we've been doing all summer. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m. we do such a webinar. We'll send around those links, but just wanted to highlight that as it's a unique juncture in this pandemic for all of us, and wanted to highlight that for your readers and listeners. So you'll see the jobs report. You'll see the jobs report a bit ago, and the numbers are certainly different than they were last month. But I'm mindful of the fact that this is all contextual, and I thought Burl had a great quote in his piece on the job numbers last month when he said, "When the job numbers are good, officials say, look at those great numbers. And when the numbers are not so good, they say, don't read too much into 1 month's data. It's a time-honored tradition." And I thought that was a very fair statement. And so we will not overplay any of this, and hopefully we didn't underplay it last month. But I think it's a fair context as we head into this, because, of course, we did see better numbers this month. 14,500 jobs, up about a 0.5% change, roughly on par with the country. The private sector gained 8,700 of those jobs, and you saw the unemployment rate tick down to 3.9%. You compare that to the U.S., and again, we're largely on par there. And then you saw some adjustments from June, where, in fact, now June we did have some job growth compared to the losses that we thought were there last month. The numbers were revised up to show a 0.2% growth in jobs overall, and about a 0.2% growth in the private sector as well. So again, this is not a smooth path out of this pandemic. Any given month's data is to be looked at with the appropriate expectations. We've begun publishing, and you'll see this in the report today, kind of 3-month rolling averages, just to give a slightly longer time window there, and we can get into that more in detail if it's helpful, but wanted to try to give longer views of these numbers so that as you analyze them and share them with your readers and listeners, there's that context of some of the broader windows to examine in this pathway towards the next chapter of our economy. So big picture, though, we lost 416,300 jobs back at the start of the pandemic, and we've now gained back about 265,800 of those jobs. So we're about 64% back to where we were. The gains this month came across a bunch of different categories. One, I think, to highlight in particular, given a lot of the conversations around this industry, would be in leisure and hospitality. We were up 7,700 jobs there. And summer is always a time when you do see more people going into leisure and hospitality, given Minnesota's summer resort economy. But usually around this time, you'd see maybe 1,000 bump. So seeing 7,700 is a significant jump. We know many leisure and hospitality businesses are still struggling for workers. You've all seen the signs of businesses that have had to close on off days and things like that just because of the lack of a labor shortage. So this is by no means over, but certainly a good surge there in jobs pick up for that industry in particular. Government was up 5,800 jobs. Construction was up 900 jobs. That's good news. Professional and business services are down 200. Primarily, that's a temp help issue. Healthcare and social assistance is down 1,300 jobs. You all know well that, in fact, the industry is hiring like gangbusters. We think that drop is actually just the staffing challenges they face right now. So not necessarily a sign of the fact that there is an opportunity there, but it's just harder to hire given the labor shortage in our state. So when you look at this year, sort of over the year so far, we've gained about 140,000 jobs. We're up about 5.1% over the year, and the private sector is about up 5.3% since July of last year. A lot of other sectors that showed strength, and I'll leave that to Orion to get into some of the more details. One of the other interesting things we wanted to point out is wage growth. So now over the year, we're up on wage growth about $1.27, so up about 4%. That's a pretty big jump, and you've all seen and reported on the fact that many businesses are raising wages to attract more workers. In fact, we think that number would be higher if it weren't for the fact that a lot of the individuals coming off of unemployment and back into the market are going into jobs that are at the lower wage end of the spectrum. So that's actually pulling that number down maybe a little bit more than otherwise would be. But still, at 4% over the year, that's a pretty big jump in wages, and the average work week is lengthening too as things continue to expand. I mentioned the unemployment rate down to 3.9%. Labor force participation rate, something we've talked a lot about on these calls and that we're tracking very closely. It ticked down just slightly to 67.8%, labor force decreasing by about 778 workers. We think as we look into the data, that's due to some of the older workers retiring. You saw that broadly across the country. About 1 million boomers retired ahead of schedule throughout the pandemic, given some of the effects on their job prospects and just the nature of the virus. I will say that this area of labor force participation is definitely an area for future analysis for us. We want to look into this more deeply because the state demographer, other economists, our own department had been already predicting a decline in labor force participation given the demographics we face in our state in the coming decade. And so we want to try to untangle how much of that is just on par with our projections and how much of the pandemic influenced some of those issues too. So we're going to keep tracking that, but it's worth examining. I think this is a month where you saw a larger drop since February for women than men, and so women are not getting back into the labor force as quickly as men, and we can get into some of the more details there if it's interesting. By race, labor force participation rate is highest for Hispanics at 78%, compared to white workers at 68.6, and black workers are at 65.5. So those for white and black workers, it both fell slightly in July, but for Hispanic workers, it went up. We will talk a little bit about the 12-month rolling averages for unemployment for our demographic groups a little bit later in the presentation. We do know that black workers are finding jobs more quickly, so you'll see that rate going down, but they are in lower wage jobs, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. We're analyzing those numbers too, because for so many of these metrics that were pretty standard for a time, they're facing new data issues and new perception issues that we want to make sure we're digesting, correctly for all of you and informing the public. So I'd say on the whole, again, the journey out of this pandemic into this next chapter of our economy continues. It has ups, it has downs, it has moments that we can celebrate, moments where we're scratching our heads. And I would just say our department continues to really stay laser focused on getting as many Minnesotans back into work as possible. With unemployment insurance benefits ending in September, kids going back to school, we know the fall will be different. Exactly how it'll be different, we wouldn't pretend to project, but we know that there will be a shift this fall as things continue to progress. And we remain focused on the Delta variant and making sure that people get vaccinated. It's the #1 economic development tool we have at our hands right now, both from a consumer confidence perspective, but also from the ability to get people back into those in-person jobs and keep this growth going. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Oriane for a little bit of a deeper dive, and then really curious to get your questions. So Oriane, over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, this graph shows total jobs, private sector jobs, and the unemployment rate. As the commissioner said, we added 14,500 jobs in July, and that was on top of 4,900 jobs in June. Those revisions in June were primarily just late reporters with very strong data coming in after the cutoff for June. And so about a little under half of those jobs, those additional jobs, so in the private sector was an additional 6,900 jobs, were in leisure and hospitality. In terms of the unemployment rate, this brings the number of unemployed to 118,000. That number is just 14,000 people fewer than in February 2020. The number of employed is now at 2.9 million, and that's just 101,000. Well, I shouldn't say just. It's still 101,000 lower than in February 2020 before the pandemic. And then the labor force now at 3,030,000 has shrunk by 87,000 since pre-pandemic. So combining these 101,000 Minnesotans, the 14,000 additional unemployed, plus the 87,000 labor force dropouts, represents the adjusted number of unemployed, which includes those who have dropped out of the labor force and stopped looking for work. So the next graph will show kind of that number broken out by the different racial groups that we are able to report on in Minnesota. So if you look at each group, the adjusted, what we're calling the adjusted unemployment rate, or the adjusted unemployment rate translated into a number of workers is 11,100 in June. So the additional labor force dropouts, the labor force dropouts during the pandemic period, plus the number of unemployed, Black workers is 11,100. For white workers, it's 131,700. And for Latinx, it's 15,700. So you're talking about quite a lot of people who have dropped out of the labor force over this period, in addition to actually smaller numbers who are unemployed. And then the next slide shows the same information for women and men. And this is the first month that we're showing a larger drop in labor force participation for women than for men in Minnesota in quite a while. So that's the blue part of those bars. Women's labor force participation rate is now 64.3% compared to men at 72.2%. And again, these are all using 12-month moving averages because the data is just not there to do month to month. And so we're really looking back a whole year here. Women are also seeing a rise in a larger rise in unemployment compared to men. So their unemployment rate is now 4.8% in July compared to 4.4% for men. And this is really a flip from where it typically is. Women typically have much lower unemployment than men in Minnesota. And hand in hand with this, women's employment to population ratio has slid more than men since February 2020. So this is just the fact that fewer women are managing to move into work at this point, into employment. I think you can move to the next slide. So over the years, the commissioner said we added 140,908 jobs, with the largest gains numerically in leisure and hospitality, professional and business services, and healthcare and education. Again, this is over the year compared to July 2020. With the fast pace of hiring in leisure and hospitality, we're also seeing wage increases in that specific sector. So the commissioner talked about wage increases across all sectors, but just looking at leisure and hospitality, the average hourly wage there now has been consistently above $15 an hour pretty much throughout 2021 so far. And this is really the first time we're seeing such high wages there. And that's specifically for food, service, and drinking places. And even more specifically, it's for the production workers, so the non-supervisory, non-managerial. And I'm reporting on that because that's what we have data for. But it's very much of a critical sector right now where hiring is just very, very strong right now in that industry with a lot of challenges. So as of July, the average weekly wage for production workers in food services and drinking places is $16.37 an hour. That's $2.20 or 15.7% up from July 2019. So from pre-pandemic, let's let's forget about last year because last year was a real anomaly, but from pre-pandemic, that's up 15.7%. In terms of industries that are continue to see job loss over the year, financial activities and information both continue to show job losses. And you can go to the next slide. So in terms of, this is the seasonally adjusted comparison between the job losses between February 2020 and April 2020, and then how many we've gained back. Sectors that are closest to reaching pre-pandemic employment levels are now construction, which is at 96% of its February 2020 employment. Professional, scientific, and technical services comes in second at 95%. And again, we did see losses there this month. That was primarily due to temp help, and temp help does tend to jump around a lot. Some of that is just kind of lumpy or bad reporting. So we'll just have to keep tracking that. As you might remember, we had very, very, very strong growth in temp help coming out of the pandemic, and we'll just have to see how it moves in the next couple months. Arts, entertainment, and recreation is back up to 85% of where it was pre-pandemic. Retail trade, 78%, educational services has regained 74%, other services, 73%, and then accommodations and food services, which lost 118,500 jobs between February and April 2020, is back to 70.3% of that number. In terms of those industries, you know, again, that have seen job losses over this period on a seasonally adjusted basis, in addition to financial activities and information, there's also, we also show a loss of 600 jobs in management of companies, which is part of professional business services. And I think at this point, we're going to take questions.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Orion. Yep, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand and ask your question.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I realized I wasn't muted this whole time, so you've probably been hearing me typing. Anyways, I was wondering if you could talk about, you know, what you're expecting to see next month as the unemployment benefits, the extended benefits do expire. Deadline coming up, and, you know, I don't know if there's any things you're kind of can sense or gauge about like what impact that is already having and may have next month.
Hey, Kavita, it's a great question, and I think, you know, these things are hard to predict. I think, just to state the obvious, I think there's a lot of factors at play right now. I think one, employers are figuring out new ways to attract workers, and you see that across the state with some really innovative new strategies being developed, whether it's more flexible hours, helping pay for childcare, as you've seen with wage rates going up, increased pay, different kinds of benefits. So I think part of what you're seeing, just, and this is anecdotal and talking with employers across the state, is that businesses are trying new things to get workers, you know, in the doors. I think every month that we move forward, people are calculating the risk profile of where they're at, and while I think Delta remains a real concern and a major focus of our administration, we know that people are finding their ways back into in-person jobs. The fall is going to be fascinating. You've got the shift in unemployment insurance and benefits, to be clear, that will play a role in what happens this fall. But so will kids going back to school, and so will the trajectory of the virus. So you've got kind of several factors in play in the coming month or two. I tend to think overall people might be overplaying what they think September will mean for our economy. I wouldn't want to say that it's going to be like, boom, September hits and we're back to some you know, pre-pandemic normal. I think especially given where the virus is headed and the fact that there are a whole host of broader factors in our economy contributing to the labor shortage. But we certainly hope that the numbers continue to look good and that more people do get back to work. And we've been as we've talked about multiple times here, just really assertive on that front. And so I wouldn't expect that it shifts from a rocky road to a smooth one as soon as September hits. But we know that the fall always brings a different tone to our economy, and this year probably more than most.
And are you seeing any evidence that the Delta variant is maybe depressing a little bit of job return, or people's willingness to take jobs, or I don't know, maybe that was something we'll have to.
Fair to say it's on people's minds. It's on everyone's minds. And you talk to both workers considering their return, and you talk to businesses trying to navigate how to make people feel safe. The business owners I talk to across the state are telling me they're worried about consumer confidence, and they want to make sure that people feel safe in their businesses. And we are obviously, with emergency powers behind us, we aren't putting restrictions into the economy to fight back Delta in the same way that we did when we were under emergency authority. But a lot of businesses are reaching out and asking DEED and the Department of Health and others, how would you handle this? Like, should we require masks? How should we be thinking about vaccines? And so, again, we're here just to advise on those things, but an increase in those questions has come about over the past, I would say, even couple of weeks, where we're getting more businesses reaching out, wondering what we think they might do or what we're hearing others are doing, just to provide confidence both for consumers and workers. And you see that in various companies' vaccine policies. I think some of the most effective measures on encouraging folks to get vaccines have been led not by government, but by the private sector, whether that's drives to get people vaccinated, or in some cases, requirements. And you've seen the governor try to lead by example there for his workforce. But I think those are the kinds of questions and issues that are starting to get surfaced in a more deliberate way as we head into the fall.
Thanks, Commissioner Burrow. Over to you.
Thank you. I know that the numbers a lot of times are year over year. I didn't know if you had, probably Orion, I didn't know if you had a number for the total number of jobs added in the calendar year so far, the first 7 months.
Yeah. Oh, in the calendar year. Oh, sure. Can I just email you that?
Sure. And then I guess second question, like about 40% of the jobs that were added last month were from government. Was there any particular trend that you guys saw, or any reason for that?
Well, government is very much in hiring mode right now. This is almost all local government. And it's a lot of recreation, summer programs, summer camps, parks, and, basically hiring that hadn't taken place last year because all of this was shut down.
Okay. Thank you.
It also, I should also say that school districts are also keeping staffing very high this summer because they're offering a lot of educational programming, a lot more than is typical.
Thanks, Orion. Do you have another question?
Yeah, and you might have covered this, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but was curious if you could talk a little bit about what we're seeing with the Black unemployment rate. It's like even below the white unemployment rate at this point. And it seems like it's been 2 months now where we've kind of seen this trend. So what do you think is going on there? Or is this a data issue, small sample size issue?
I'm sorry to say that I am skeptical of that number. I'm trying to get more information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that does the current population survey that these numbers come out of. I need to, I really am very skeptical of those numbers. I'm not sure if the sample is just not performing well. It's a very small sample. This trend hasn't just been in the last couple of months. It's actually been a bit longer than that. And so that's why I'm worried that it is a sampling issue and trying to get to the bottom of it with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So, hopefully we'll have better information next month, although we may not. So we'll just have to see how that works out.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad you asked it, Kavita, because we're scratching our heads a little bit at that one too. it's why on the graph on the presentation you saw this month, we added that additional view into adding sort of labor force participation drop on top of unemployment rate to try to aggregate those two factors as kind of health checks on those demographics. And as you saw from that graph, significant drops in the Black community and other BIPOC communities in those rates that kind of tell a bigger picture story. But we're digging into this too, as Orion said. I think it should not be the conclusion that therefore somehow we've reached equality in our state. That's not the conclusion to pull out of the data.
One thing that we are seeing though is that Black workers are, re-entering jobs very, in large numbers. So that is a very positive piece of these statistics.
Thanks. Are there any other questions from reporters on the line?
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Hope you're enjoying your summer in Minnesota, and we'll continue to track this. Please, as always, reach out with more questions, and thanks for the work you're doing to keep people abreast of where our economy is headed and what we need to do to get it there faster. So thanks, everybody. Take care.